So tonight's movie review, I had two options to basically review tonight. I could either have gone to see Frozen 2, which of course is a big sequel. You know, the first Frozen, holy crap, was that a major blockbuster. But I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so the only movie that made sense to go see tonight's review was A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. So I grew up here. I live here, grew up and live here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the home of America's favorite and most beloved neighbor, Mr. Fred Rogers. And this movie's been coming for a while. Filming. I remember this past year, filming here in Pittsburgh going on, and I was on my way to work, and the parking garage I usually use. It was blocked off because of the filming, so I had to use another parking garage. But, it's exciting, like Mr. Rogers being up on the big screen, this retelling of a part of his life, and having Tom Hanks play him. I mean, come on, right? But anyway, so another little story before I get into the review. I, don't want to stretch these things out here, but David Newell, who played Mr. McFeely, the postman in the actual Mr. Rogers show, he was at the theater I went to tonight. He was signing autographs, answering questions, taking pictures. It was great. Before the movie started, he came into the theater, was the theater owner, and was telling little stories about Mr. Rogers and the backstory on this movie, and all came together. So it was really nice. It was like this extra experience. Not only were we getting to see this, movie that's been very anticipated, very, very anticipated indeed, but we got to get somebody from the Mr. Rogers family come in and add that special little touch to it. And that was really nice. I seriously... I really enjoyed just having him there, and he like said speedy delivery like a dozen times. And every time, I don't give a damn. It was fucking awesome. Mr. Rogers there, he probably wouldn't like me using the F word, but Mr. Rogers, sweet man. All right, so let's get into this film. So, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood stars Tom Hanks as the iconic Mr. Rogers and Matthew Rhys as Lloyd Vogel, a journalist from Esquire magazine who, back in the late 90s, was assigned a piece to go profile Mr. Rogers. And he goes to travels to Pittsburgh to meet Mr. Rogers, and he has an experience he didn't intend to have, and he goes on this wonderful journey. So let's get into it. Right off the bat, let's just talk about Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers. As we all know, Tom Hanks is an incredible actor. He's been in such big movies as, of course, Philadelphia, which got him his first Oscar, Apollo 13. Those are probably his two biggest ones, I would say. And he's just become one of the most beloved actors in Hollywood. He's one of those guys, like, there's never any drama, never any controversy about him. And how does he play Mr. Rogers? I thought he played Mr. Rogers pretty well. He doesn't quite have, I'll say this about it, he doesn't quite have his voice. There's a few times where he's trying to mimic Mr. Rogers' voice. It doesn't quite come off that well. However, when in the portrayal of Mr. Rogers' personality, that's where things come through. The kindness, the attention. There's multiple times throughout the movie where you see that he gives people 100% attention at the annoyance of other people in the film, because when he's with you, you are what matters to him right then and there. And I think Tom Hanks portrayed that very well. I think he really did get that across. And it was just nice to see this, him, this kindly thing, but also kind of like a goofy guy. Like Mr. Rogers was a goofy guy, because he was a guy who was like, there's a scene in the movie where he's like using the Daniel Tiger puppet from the show, which from what I learned from the documentary, Won't You Be My Neighbor, which if you haven't seen that documentary, Mr. Rogers, go see it. It's really good. Daniel Tiger is Fred Rogers. That's his avatar in the show, if you kind of want to put it that way. So he was kind of a goofy guy in that sense, but everything he did was to try to make everyone feel valid. And that was the whole point of the Mr. Rogers show, was to let children know you have emotions. That's perfectly fine. You're human. Let me help you deal with those emotions, or, manage them in a healthy way. And that's what he's trying to do in this film for Lloyd Vogel, once again played by Matthew Rhys. And let's get into the character of Lloyd Vogel. He's a writer for Esquire magazine, as I said earlier, and he's a very cynical man, incredibly cynical, to the point where you might not like him a lot. He might be a little standoffish. He doesn't try to be. He tries to be a nice guy. He's a journalist. He wants to get to the bottom of it. He really wants to dissect, the story and people and put it out there, even if it's something they don't want to hear about themselves. So yeah, he can be very harsh at times with his writing as the film presents it. And the reason for this is because, as we learn pretty early on in the film, that he has a very poor relationship with his father. Him and his father have been estranged for a long time, and at first the film does not give away what happened, but we start to get more and more little bits here and there, and we find out that because of his past with his father, Lloyd has never properly processed his emotions from when he was younger, and this is where Mr. Rogers comes in. He sees that in Lloyd. He sees like this guy's got something bubbling up inside him that's holding him back from being the best person that he can be, and Mr. Rogers, wants to help him out. And the interesting about this movie, the movie's called A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. Tom Hanks, starring as Mr. Rogers, is obviously the draw, and more people obviously know about Mr. Rogers than Lloyd Vogel. But the thing is, the movie really is about Lloyd. Mr. Rogers is, part of the main cast, the main cast of characters, but the movie really is about Lloyd. We're on the journey with him. Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers is more of a supporting character, but the most, supporting character. If this were to go to the Oscars, Matthew Rhys would probably be, should they get nominations. Matthew Rhys would be nominated for Best Actor, and Tom Hanks would be nominated for Best Supporting Actor. Not saying they're going to get nominated. We'll get into that later. Not saying they won't be nominated. But I thought Matthew Rhys did a really did this part well. You can tell multiple times that Mr. Rogers is trying to get him to open up, to talk about his dad, to open up all this stuff. However, he just keeps trying to deflect because he's trying to interview Mr. Rogers, right? And Mr. Rogers is kind of trying to interview him back in a way, kind of like psychoanalyze him in his own Rogery way. But yeah, so there's genuine performances by both these men. I really enjoyed it. We also have other actors in the movie like Chris Cooper, who plays Jerry Vogel, Lloyd's father. Chris Cooper is, the great actor. First thing I remember ever seeing him was a movie called October Sky, starring Jake Gyllenhaal. Very early in Jake Gyllenhaal's career, I think he did the movie right after Donnie Darko, or right after, right before. I can't quite remember. You also have Susan Kelechi Watson, who plays Andrea Vogel, Lloyd's wife, who has to deal with Lloyd. She loves this guy. She loves him so much. But when his father starts to come back into the picture, his anger and his sadness starts to boil up, and it causes him to become, very intolerable at times. And, lots of good stuff. Lots of good performances in here. One of the things that's really cool about this film is the way they transition in between scenes. I almost don't want to give it away. It's not like a huge spoiler or anything, but the way they transition, 'cause it's not in the trailer, so that's what I mean by that. It's not like a huge spoiler, but the way they transition through scenes, one scene to another, is through the style of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I don't want to give it away, but it's a really little nice, charming way to transition in the movie, and it seriously, it adds a lot of charm to it. It makes you, kind of like warm inside if you were, grew up watching Mr. Rogers and all that stuff. Very nice, very nice. Also, nice lighting in this film. There's definitely good moments where things are nice and bright, but things are just like a little shadier, a little like, we're trying to have a little intimate scene, or there's enough like shadowing here and there to like, it. So that I enjoyed a lot too. One thing I found weird, which once again, I'm not going to say why, I'm not going to say what it is, because it definitely would be a spoiler. There's definitely a moment in this movie where they're getting, cinematically artistic, I'll say, and I totally see what's going on. I understand what like the symbolism, or I don't know, I feel like the better word to use there, but it gets a little weird. It gets a tiny bit weird. I almost laughed because it was just kind of like this kind of goofy moment, but it ended on a tender note. So yeah, it's definitely got a moment. Like, I think some people might laugh at it. I see what they were going for there, but it's a little weird. Other people might appreciate it more. And for the artistic touch they're trying to put on during that scene. The movie. Another thing I appreciate about this film, because usually because once again, the movie is more about Lloyd, which I like. I think he's an interesting character to follow. He's the kind of person that Mr. Rogers, was always looking out for as a person. It's about Lloyd, which is great. Also, when you hear a movie, the Mr. Rogers, they're making a Mr. Rogers biopic movie. Holy crap! Most of these biopic movies are trying to like encapsulate like either the celebrity's entire life or like the several decades of their adulthood or whatever. Like instance would be called Rocket Man, the Elton John movie that came out earlier this year, or Bohemian Rhapsody before that. A lot of like the musician films do this, but this movie is just about a week or two in the life of Mr. Rogers and Lloyd Vogel. It's not this big thing that's going on for years and years, and I really appreciate that because they were able to focus just on that one part of this the lifelong story of this man and this person he interacted with and wanted to help out, and I think and that's nice, and it helps with the fact because once again Lloyd is the main character, so it's not really about Mr. Rogers. It's about the story of, and it's focused there. So, because, we hear a Mr. Rogers movie, it's like, oh, they're going to start back and how he came up with the show and all that. No, it's this focused moment in this bit of history, and that I liked. That I thought went really well. So, let's get to it. Do I recommend A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood? So like I said, I really enjoyed Tom Hanks. I don't think his I don't want to say impression, his performance as Mr. Rogers was quite spot on. What he got spot on was the kindness and the intention and the focus that Mr. Rogers would give people. His voice and kind of like certain little, he got some mannerisms, but not all of them. Matthew Rhys is really good in this film. I thought he did well. There was that weird part in the movie where we're getting artistic, but I was like, this is weird. And then another part where it's like, oh, this artistic touch with the transitions. This is nice and charming. I like this. So I will give A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood a recommendation. I do recommend it. So go out, check it. I think everybody will get a little something out of this film. Not a perfect film, not as good as I was hoping, but it was nice ride into this story. And I got a kick out of it. And if you're from Pittsburgh, like me, I think you'll get even more of a kick out of it. It's kind of hard. Once again, I could have reviewed Frozen 2, but it was like, Mr. Rogers movie. Come on, I gotta go see the Mr. Rogers movie. Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed that clip. We live stream every Thursday night on our Twitch channel, and of course, check us out on the River's Edge Online Radio Network.